Okay, so let's get more now on the tense NAFTA talks from our U.S. political panel. Linda Feldman of the Christian Science Monitor is in Washington, while in Virginia Beach we have David Martosko, U.S. political editor at thedailymail.com. Hello to both of you. Good afternoon. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, thank you.
Hi, Aarti.
So, Linda, first we'll start with you. Canada and the U.S. have been in these negotiation talks really for months, but of course ramped up in the past few days. And then Friday, this news comes out that Trump isn't planning on budging on any of the contentious issues at all. So how should Canada feel about that news, about those remarks that were made by the U.S. president?
Well, those remarks are obviously quite concerning if you're Canada. I mean, we know that Trump is a tough negotiator, but I think people need to remember just how it is that Trump negotiates. He uses all the leverage he has. He knows he's the big player on the world stage and in the NAFTA threesome, and just so on the one hand he can really throw his weight around, but Canada is not without leverage. Canada is the #1 destination for U.S. exports, and 8 million American jobs are supported by trade with Canada. So Canada has some arrows in its quiver. Also bear in mind that the U.S. has reached a tentative deal with Mexico. Donald Trump does not like Mexico. Donald Trump has much less warm feelings toward Mexico than he does toward Canada. So not that Donald Trump's emotions matter here, but if he can make a deal with Mexico, I think ultimately he can make some kind of deal with Canada, but I have no idea how this will play out, but I think the story is far from over.
And now, David, I've got a scenario question for you, okay? So I want you to put yourself in the shoes of the Canadian negotiators for a moment here. And as Linda said, Canada does have some leverage, #1 destination for the U.S. when it comes to exports. So when talks resume next week, what can Canada do, given that Trump apparently won't give an inch on the issues that concern them?
Well, first you have to realize, if you're the Canadian negotiators, that as long as America's economy is strong, Trump's not going to listen to arguments about what tariffs will do to the U.S. economy. Our GDP growth is up to 4.2%. It's probably going to go higher. So Trump feels like he's got solid ground to stand on. But here's what they could do. Like in any good negotiation, you want to try to find a win-win. You want to try to tell Trump that there's something in whatever they offer. But here's the catch. It's got to be something political. It can't just be something economic, because we have an election coming up here in just a few months. And Trump is going to hit the road in states where endangered Republicans are trying to win re-election. And he's going to say two things. He's going to say, you know, so-and-so, Senator Himmelfarb of the great Republican, will vote with me on Capitol Hill. You have to elect him because we're doing great things for the economy, and here's what we've managed to get out of the Canadians. And the other thing he's going to say is that the Democrats are complaining and whistling Dixie and complaining about the economic fallout from whatever deal he's made. So he's going to go on a political exercise after whatever is negotiated. And so if the Canadians want to persuade the American team, like, you know, Lighthizer and those guys, that they've got a good offer, it has to be framed as a good offer that Trump can run politically on during our midterm elections.
And to that very point of there being some politics obviously playing into this too, and of course Trump wanting to show that this is his strength, that negotiations and deal making is really what he ran on, and it is something that he wants to continue to stand on. And that strength was very prominent in a tweet that we saw over the weekend about NAFTA, and we'll pull that up right now. And in it, he says, there is no political necessity to keep Canada in the new NAFTA deal. If we don't make a fair deal for the U.S. after decades of abuse, Canada will be out. Congress should not interfere with these negotiations, or I will simply terminate NAFTA entirely, and we will be far better off. All right, so Linda, I want to go to you on this, and don't worry, David, I'm going to get you to weigh in on it too. But first, Linda, isn't congressional approval necessary for this? Can the U.S. president just terminate NAFTA on his own?
No, he can't. He has to give 6 months' notice before any termination of NAFTA. So Trump's idea that he can just do this all on his own just isn't true. And we've seen a lot of support for NAFTA, not the current NAFTA, but for a solid renegotiation of NAFTA, including Canada, among members of Congress. So while this is nail-biter time for Canada, I do think that eventually he's going to have to reach something. And yes, David is right. There has to be something for the Americans in this. Donald Trump needs to be able to go out onto the trail. in his campaign events and say, hey, we played tough with Canada and we got this, this, and this. The dairy issue is huge. Dairy states in this country voted for Donald Trump in 2016, and there are some key races in dairy states. We know that the Canadians have the same political issue with Quebec and its dairy industry. So I think this will very much be in the mix when they sit down again on Wednesday.
And David, I want you to weigh in on that tweet too. Obviously, it was very strong words directed at Canada, also warning in there for Congress, saying that they should not interfere. So a lot of sort of threatening language that we're going to step away from you, Canada, and Congress, watch out. I don't want you stepping on my toes either. What do you make of all of this?
Well, I think it's even more troublesome for Trump than Linda suggests. You know, he can give 6 months notice to pull out of NAFTA, and he can sort of, sign something that says we're no longer in NAFTA. But the terms of NAFTA were put in place by Congress in 1994 in a bill called the NAFTA Implementation Act. So the actual things that NAFTA did are statutory. He would need Congress to roll that back in new legislation. There's actually some interesting history here. Back in 1974, there was some legislation that firmly put foreign commerce in the hands of the executive branch, of the president. But around the same time NAFTA was ratified and put into place, there was a Supreme Court decision that said, well, no, actually, these are really treaties. They're not just commerce acts, and Congress has control over them, not the president. So if the president finds himself with his back against the wall, as he sometimes does, and decides to, quote unquote, end NAFTA, Congress will push back against them. He'll be able to demonize Democrats all over again. More importantly, there will be lawsuits in the same way there were when his travel ban first went into effect. You'll see lawsuits by organized labor. You'll see lawsuits by dairy cooperatives. You'll see all kinds of lawsuits. And some countries, interestingly enough, once this is no longer part of NAFTA, here's the fun thing. If it's not part of NAFTA, if NAFTA is quote unquote gone, and all the terms of NAFTA are just part of a statute that the Congress passed in 1994, then every country in the world is going to say, this is no longer a three-part pact. This is your normal trade operations. We want the same terms, or we'll take it to the WTO. So Trump is ready to open up a can of worms whose dimensions I don't think he comprehends at this point. And so I think I wouldn't say point Canada, but I would say he's got less real-world leverage than he believes he does.
And in those broader terms too, Linda, let's go back to you for a moment. When we're talking about the broader ramifications of the actions, the rhetoric that we're hearing from the U.S. president, and certainly we heard a lot of reaction saying, is the president negotiating here in good faith, or is this in bad faith when he's got a completely separate agenda, apparently, and is still imposing this deadline on Canada to reach these renegotiations on NAFTA? Could this have a broader impact on trade deals with other countries?
Absolutely. I think it's important to put this in the global context. The big show, so there's NAFTA, which has its geographic importance, and the size of just the trade relationship among these three countries is massive. But the big show is China. And what's happening here is Donald Trump is sending a signal to China that he is not going to lie down and let China do whatever it wants. He is sending the message that he is as tough as it gets, and when the big show comes with China, to watch out. So this is, this is the larger context here in which he's operating.
All right, now we're going to have to pause the conversation there for a moment, but stay with us because still ahead, paying tribute to a political trailblazer.